Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is episode number 75, and today Maggie and I are joined by some special guests whom we're very excited to talk to. We are joined today by Paul Godfrey and Simon Buttle over there from the UK, not just a little south of Maggie, actually. So
yeah, we're not too far away.
Yeah, no, that's great. Joining us from Cardiff here this evening.
Thanks for staying up late with us, guys.
Exactly. Appreciate it.
Quick technical thing. Apparently they can't hear us on Twitch.
That, I think, is not a me problem. I think that's a Twitch problem. Twitch has been having problems. So that's
fine.
Reload Twitch and try to convince it to be better. But
awesome.
Okay.
Anyway,
yeah.
To you guys.
Yeah. So, this is something that I have just myself recently discovered about. I knew almost nothing about this. So I know I am one, and I am sure there are many others who are in the same position of just being fascinated to discover. So adaptation of Tolkien into opera. Tell us, of course, I want to get to like exciting stuff about where this is right now, but maybe let's start with sort of the history. Paul, I know this has been a long-term project for you, right?
Yes, well, I started sketching out bits of music for Tolkien back during my teenage years, rather longer ago than I care to remember now, in the late 60s. And by the time I was in the mid-70s, I'd already written out in full a complete setting of The Hobbit and probably about a quarter of The Lord of the Rings, which I designed in a moment of total and utter and sheer unadulterated madness to be over a total of 13 evenings.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my God.
That's fantastic.
That obviously was an absolute non-starter in all possible terms, but and musical and sheer endurance of the listeners.
Yeah.
And when the Silmarillion was first published in 1977, I did a little bit of work on my third symphony, the Ainulindale Symphony, which was basically inspired by the Silmarillion. But it wasn't until Christopher Tolkien published The Unfinished Tales in 1980-81 that it became apparent there was enough material there to possibly make an opera out of The Children of Húrin in particular.
Yes.
I wrote to Rainer Unwin and said I would be interested in doing that. I sent him a copy of an opera I had already written, which he then sent on to Christopher Tolkien. I was then asked to provide a sample of what I proposed to do with The Children of Húrin, and I corralled a friendly local pianist into my front room, sat down and recorded the whole of the opening scene of The Children of Húrin, with myself playing the part of Húrin and also singing the part of Morgoth, which I achieved the relevant amplification by sticking my head into a large metal bucket.
Nice. High tech.
This was sent off to Rainer Unwin and Christopher Tolkien, both of which didn't actually get through a total fit, but actually came back and said they were interested.
Oh.
And Christopher Tolkien then followed it up with a suggestion that he would be willing to supply me with some other material by his father if I wanted to actually fill out parts of the plot which were missing in the Unfinished Tales version.
Yes.
In fact, these were parts of what later were published in the History of Middle-earth. So
Yes.
I'll stop this. And, oh, they are here, are they?
No, they're not here. They've not come to you yet.
There's a disappointment. Anyway, so I actually saw bits of the Book of Lost Tales before they even appeared in print. We then went on, once I'd finished the score, to a performance at the Oxen Moot in 1982, where we actually did chunks of The Children of Húrin as part of an evening recital, which we'd rehearsed in the afternoon at Priscilla Tolkien's house, using what I afterwards discovered was Edith Tolkien's old piano.
Oh, wow.
with Priscilla herself singing in the chorus.
Oh, stop.
Uh, uh, anyway, that evening, then people were saying to me, "Oh yes, you need to do some more of it." And I said, "Well, there's not enough. There's not enough material to actually provide enough dialogue for anything operatic or anything on a large scale." Priscilla Talkie said, "I think you'll find there is." Um,
Material we've got.
Yeah, that's not the problem.
So progressively, I mean, the order I actually worked on the operas was totally bizarre because I actually started work next on Fëanor as
Okay.
the prelude.
Right.
I then the Fall of Gondolin, and it was only lastly that I actually came to doing Beren and Luthien. That was largely because with Beren and Luthien, I had particular problems with actually trying to fashion a text. Of course, the vast majority of Tolkien's finished version of Beren and Luthien is in verse.
Right.
And I actually changed some of the verse into prose. There was a Tolkien prose version of it, and I was expecting that to appear in print. Of course, it never did.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished up having to actually improvise some of my own prose, which I think, or rather Christopher Tolkien sent me some versions of his father's prose version for comparison. And I was pleased to discover that we've more or less come to the similar conclusions. That was as far as it went with the Silmarillion. When I finished the whole cycle of 4 operatic evenings in 1996, I then started with the idea that I'd try and get it performed. Oh dear.
Oh, no.
The general reaction was too expensive, too complicated, too large scale. Can't you do some of it on a smaller scale in bits? I tried doing some of it on a smaller scale in bits. People still weren't interested. And eventually the whole thing just more or less died the death until Simon came onto the scene back in 2016.
16, yes. 2016, yes.
Okay.
You want to, come on, you take over that.
Oh, I take over. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I was organising a concert of songs and poetry by First World War poets, and obviously I'm a Tolkien fan. I knew he served, and I knew that he started writing bits of the Silmarillion in that era.
Yeah.
So I had a very long, boring journey whilst touring with Welsh National Opera. We were travelling from Milton Keynes to Plymouth, and I was sat in the car, just not driving and checking the internet, just to be sure. I was in the passenger seat, and I was trying to find people that had done settings of Tolkien. Now, I know Donald Swann did some songs, and I've performed some of them. You know, I love them, but I was just thinking, has someone else done something? And I found this website of Paul's, which it's referred to Tolkien operas and things. And I'm like, well, I've worked in the opera business for 15 years at that point, really, or 12 years at that point. I'm thinking, why have I never heard of any of this? So I, whilst we were traveling, I just pressed a thing to contact, and I sent Paul an email saying, I'd be interested in seeing some of your scores, and I got a response back very quickly whilst I was in the car, and he just said, all of my music is held in the T. Caird Music Library in Cardiff. I was like, well, I work in the Wales Millennium Centre where the T. Caird Music Library is. So, and so it was just, and eventually we worked out that we live, as the crow flies, about 3 miles from each other.
Serendipity.
It's South Wales roads, though, so whilst the crow flies miles, it's a 9-mile journey.
Right.
But and so we started talking, we met up, and I started dabbling with bits of Paul's music, and I have a computer system set up because for many years I've been recording learning tracks for choirs where we have one person come at a time and isolate lines so people that don't read music can learn. And so I had a basic computer setup for recording, and I just thought, well, he's written all this music, but I can't hear it. I wanted to hear it, so I dabbled around with the sound samples and things I had, and I recorded one of the arias from The Fall of Gondolin, which Paul had suggested to me. So someone on my Discord is commenting that I'm holding back on my Yorkshire accent. It's so that people can understand me. Thank you. So I recorded this aria without Paul knowing, and it's scene 5 of Fall of Gondolin, isn't it?
scene
Yeah.
5.
And I recorded it using orchestral samples and everything like that, and I just sent it to Paul, and he got rather excited because he'd obviously never heard it
Right.
like that, someone singing it. So and once we did that, I just said, right, well, do you know what? I want to hear the rest of it. So I just started dabbling at either end of that scene in Fall of Gondolin, and we kept stretching, we kept doing bits more and more either way. And in the end, I ended up having the full score of Fall of Gondolin in the computer. And I'm lucky. I have some amazingly talented friends that I work with every day, and they didn't take much persuading to take part. And
Nice.
we just said, right, well, let's just record the Fall of Gondolin for fun. We don't know what we're going to do with it, but we're just going to record it. So, people came in their own time, did it for nothing. We just recorded the entire opera. And, and as we were getting towards the end of recording, Paul had a link with Prima Facie Records for his Calabeth album. And I believe that you contacted him to say there's this demo recording of Fall of Gondolin, and would you like to hear it? And Steve at Prima Facie Records was extremely excited and said, yeah, we can release it. So we did, and we've done it on a profit share. So, no one got paid for doing it, but it's just that. And of course, from there, we've worked through all of the Silmarillion. So, we did, we recorded them in a very different order than Paul did, and there's many reasons for that. And too long to go into here. Join us on our Discord. I'll explain everything there if you ever need it. But so we did Fall of Gondolin, Beren and Luthien, Children of Húrin, but Children of Húrin came out when COVID hit.
Right.
So we couldn't promote it very well. We couldn't, because normally we'd go off and promote things, do concerts and things. So Children of Húrin came out. We were, we got stuck for a couple of years. We had Feanor on the cards, and we also had another thing that I strong-armed Paul into doing, which I kept commenting on him that his version of the Silmarillion didn't have an ending.
Well, that's a classic Silmarillion problem right there.
His ending to Fall of Gondolin, he'd kind of just gone, well, we'll just have to end it here, because Paul kept saying to me, there's not enough stuff to finish off the rest of the story. I was determined to prove him wrong. And so I waded through all my Tolkien books and found various bits, and came up with what wouldn't have been a full-length opera, but would have kind of been like a little one-actor that was The Journey of Eärendil.
Yes.
I helped him with the libretto for it, and I sent it to him, and I got a kind of response. Yeah, not sure. And then Paul decided to have a car accident on his way to Holland.
That's dramatic.
I leave him alone for a few days, and he's in a car accident on his way to the airport when you were going to Italy, weren't you?
Yes.
Do you want to say this?
Yeah, I'll try carry on.
Yeah, you carry on.
Yeah. I came around in a hospital in Venice, where I was confined to a bed for a whole week with a whole collection of broken ribs, and I was in a ward where I was told the view was absolutely superb. I could look out over the Lido towards Venice and see St. Mark's in the distance. The only problem was, where I was in the bed, I couldn't see any of this view. The doctors got a marvellous view, the nursing staff, and I could see the whole thing. I was bored to total insanity. And I decided to actually have a go at looking at the text for the War of Wrath, as we now dubbed it. And within the period I was actually confined to the hospital bed, I wrote the whole of the prologue to the War of Wrath.
Wow.
I then was sent off to the airport in Venice, where I was actually supposed to be catching a flight down to Naples, and I had 3 hours to spare, and I thought, right, I shall try and put this now down onto paper and try and get it into some sort of order. Whereupon there was probably a power cut throughout the airport, which meant that I was stuck there for an incredible length of time, nothing apart from scoring this scene, which had more or less finished by the time I got to Naples. Anyway, the War of Wrath then fell into place with remarkable speed. partly because I'd already set the Lay of Eärendil as a separate standalone thing some years before. So that provided the framework for most of the second part of the War of Wrath. So all I had to do was the first part, which was the ruin of Doriath, and the last part, which was what follows the Lay of Eärendil, in other words, the actual battle, and leading on into Sauron forging the One Ring.
Mm.
One problem I had was that there was no ending, which I think has already been alluded to. And fortunately, about that time, or yes, it was just about after that. This was before the COVID thing had actually struck, mind you. I was in Birmingham in 2019, and I had a chat to Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull about whether they had any bright suggestions about material that I'd not used elsewhere. They pointed me in the direction of the poem Cortirion, which is actually included in the Book of Lost Tales, Volume 1. And with some fairly substantial cutting, that then became the epilogue to the War of Wrath, as an illustration of the influence of the elves in modern times. So it became a sort of rounding out of the Silmarillion, bringing it forward almost up to the present day. And the final words of the War of Wrath, as indeed the opening words of the War of Wrath, were the Tolkien's original inspiration, the address to Eärendil, in the Elvish version he'd fashioned for Frodo in The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes at the beginning of the War of Wrath and right at the end. And the War of Wrath opens up, that prologue, which I mentioned, is a setting of the very first poem that Tolkien wrote as part of the Middle-earth mythology, which is the, I've got the first line now.
Which?
Of the prologue.
East of the...
East of the sun, west of the moon, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a good recommendation.
I missed out a small step there. When he came back from Venice, he handed me not only that prologue, but also an aria, which has ended up as Eärendil's aria in the middle, and also a plan for what the rest of the piece should be. And he just tweeted at me and said, just find these words for these bits. Every different version of the stories and trying to find the one that would adapt best to the operatic stage. So things like the Fall of Doriath won't happen exactly as it does in the Book of the Silmarillion. It's an earlier version that plays out better because it's done through dialogue, which when you're singing is a thing. And you know,
is it the version of like Húrin with the outlaws and the throw in the gold in the river and all that business?
Not quite.
Okay.
It's based on the Naudlebring chapter in the Book of Lost Tales.
Book of Lost Tales, yeah.
But it eliminates a lot of the duplication. It seemed to me ridiculous that you have the dwarves sacking Doriath, and then, the Silmaril comes to Thingol, the dwarves sack Doriath, then the Silmaril comes to Dior, and the elves sack Doriath.
Yeah, and the Fëanorian sack it, yeah.
All the time. So basically what we actually did was it cuts down to it's the Fëanorians who attacked Thingol in the first place. So the dwarves are left out of the equation altogether.
Okay.
It also has the slight advantage that it solves the problem that Tolkien never managed to solve, which is how could an enemy enter Doriath? Presumably elves would not be barred from entering Doriath, so the sons of Fëanor could enter quite happily.
Yeah. Now I will say, adapting for opera, there are things that you have to consider. So obviously, like by the time it had come to War of Wrath, a lot of the characters were already established in the other operas, or at least parents were, or things. But also, if you're going to set something up to be sung, it takes a lot longer to sing than to speak.
Yes.
So if you're going to introduce something, it needs to have a reason. So this was the big thing I discussed with Paul about the Fall of Doriath. It's like, well, if you have the dwarves, you have to spend like 10 minutes setting them up for them to just do this deed and then vanish for the rest of the piece.
Yes.
Right.
And in logistical terms, if it was a live performance, you are paying singers to come in and do these things, and the costs just escalate. So you always, you need to reduce casts down and do things. We've had similar things with people online commenting that Huan is missing from Veteran and Luthien, but again, you'd need to set up that character, you need a good 10-15 minutes explaining who he is, why he is, and to not speak, and then he speaks. But also you have to question, why is that opera singer crawling around on his hands and knees throughout the entire
Yes.
This is great. We talk about this so often with the lens of a film or the lens of a story, yet you're choosing your lens and everything else is up for chop.
Yeah.
And I love when like a practical application, like it's too expensive, it takes too long time-wise, an audience won't sit through it, factors into an adaptation choice, because that's a very valid thing. Like we have a different
It's part of the genre. Yeah.
Yeah, has to happen that way.
There's also a thing with opera that if they run on for too long, you run out of stamina. So your singers can't, your singers are struggling. If you set the entirety of Beren and Luthien as it would be in the books, it would be twice the length. And by the end, it would be voiceless.
Right. Right.
You kind of need to make sure you truncate them so they fit into a comfortable evening.
Yes,
Right.
yes. It is interesting how so many people, like fans, don't think about those kinds of practical restraints when they're imagining this thing. One parallel that immediately jumps to mind is thinking of thinking about like genre constraints or publication, practical constraints. I'm thinking about the illustrations that Tolkien published, that were published with like with The Hobbit and things, and how he wanted to have like the red dragon, but he couldn't have the red dragon because they couldn't. The red ink was like too expensive, right? So he had to reduce the number of colors and everything, and so we end up getting his illustrations, looking a little bit odder, but in a smaller number of colors because that's what the publication could do. That's what the publisher could do. So, I mean, the question between like how whenever you're doing this sort of adaptation, it's always a reality. Again, the same was true with Tolkien when he was doing his illustrations, right? You have to operate within the constraints of the situation and how to manage those constraints, how to bring your creativity in line with the constraints is part of the work of it's part of the genius, right, of doing the adaptation. So it's something that I think people don't think about enough.
And such a good example that like adaptation, we've said this before too, Tolkien is consistently adapting his own interpretation. So
Yes.
he wanted to do it one way, he had to adapt because of ink color. He's already kind of changing his own interpretation of his own story. So the fact that we have to make certain adaptations or understandings as an audience member, yep, that's part of the game.
Yeah, there's a lot with adaptations, but I mean there is another section to this story that moves on from War of Wrath though. Whilst we're filling in this first bit, is that Paul has mentioned that he wrote an early opera of The Hobbit, and he wrote about the court of Lord of the Rings. Now, obviously, the estate's rights didn't quite extend to those, but Paul during COVID had been working on it. It was, we were keeping going. So, I managed to trim down slightly his 13 evening plan to 6. Well, I think no, actually, I took it to 5, and he expanded it back up to 6. But Lord of the Rings was actually starting to form, and ended up almost completely written. In fact, completely written by the time. And it was only earlier this year that the Tolkien estate have actually granted the rights, so we can now release the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit as well. It was on theonering.net. Thank you for putting the news out in the first place. And it's been on Classic FM that it's happening. It's wonderful because these works are incredible. I mean, Lord of the Rings is huge. I'm going to be working on that until the middle of next year, I guarantee you. And the Hobbit also, we've been given the rights for the Hobbit as well. So Paul's original is going to be coming out the year after. So there's a lot of music. There's a lot to get through. Lord of the Rings is about 17 hours of music, which includes. Yeah, it includes an hour of appendices, though, with stuff that was cut. Because obviously, it's an adaptation. Things have to be cut for pacing. So, the obvious one, the Lay of Eärendil. If you have it in the chapter of the Council of Elrond, you've got one person on stage singing for 25 minutes by himself.
Right.
So, it gets cut from the main story, but we put it on the appendix. So you can hear our Bilbo singing the Lay of Eärendil as Paul originally wrote it, and it's so there's lots of extras and things like that. But it's there's a lot of music, there's a lot to get through, but it's incredible that we can get these works out to people now, because they are quite. So I can say they are quite something. And the big thing with Lord of the Rings and the War of Wrath, they were written for us to sing. We've been recording them, and Paul adapted them to the singers and did. So it's wonderful for us. We've got music being written for us that we can get out there and let the world have.
Yes.
And let the world.
And may I say, some incredibly good singers.
Don't look at me. They're very incredible singers.
Oh, I have so many questions. I don't know where we start. So
Yeah, exactly.
like
Go ahead, Maggie.
chronologically, like how did you get into Tolkien's room? How did that relationship start? That's question one. And I also want to know, I mean, clearly you blitz information down. I assume you hear it, it has to come out. You write, you're extremely prolific. How many rewrites and redrafts after that? Or is it a continuous thing? Or is it done the first time it comes out?
Right. The first one about when did I first come across Tolkien, which I think is what you're actually asking. I was 6 years old when I was given a copy of Hobbit by Lois Mitchison, who was then my half sister-in-law. I won't go into the family relationship. Who was the daughter of Naomi Mitchison, of course, who was a friend.
Right.
Tolkien's.
Yeah.
So I think the copy that Lois gave me was probably one that was given to her by Tolkien. It hasn't got he's not autographed, so I don't know. But anyway, that was the first edition of The Hobbit, and I started off by dragooning all the local neighbourhood children into trying to do a version of it I mounted in my garden when I was about 7 or 8.
Love it.
Horrible. I didn't get into the Lord of the Rings till I came across a copy in the school library about 7 or 8 years later, and when I bought the Lord of the Rings, it was the first copy of the second edition, so that will put it about 1966 or thereabouts. And I was starting, as I say, to actually do sketches almost immediately for music. I was already interested in doing music at that time. How often do I rewrite? The earliest stuff has been rewritten several times over. The Hobbit, as it now stands, is certainly the second or third draft. I've tried, when revisiting the things and going back to them, not to do more rewriting than I needed to of the early stuff. The Hobbit, because it was written in what I would call my younger and more naive style, and I wanted to preserve that. Also because the thematic material in The Hobbit then is taken up into the Lord of the Rings and given further development and different treatments. So it evolves. With the latest stuff, various parts of it were written at various times. Some of it's been through multiple rewrites. The Voyage of Sam and Frodo to Mordor is been very heavily revised from a version that was done back as far as 1969.
Wow.
And that was redone. I would say probably about a good 2/3 of it was rewritten in one way or another.
Yeah.
For the version we now have. But other parts of it were basically flowed directly from me onto the paper, and as I was saying in a discussion I was having with Simon earlier, there are some passages of that score I don't remember writing at all, but they're now there. So I must have actually done some work on them at some stage. A lot of it, of course, was instinctive. A lot of it was stuff that I'd actually had bundled up in the back of my memory for 30 years and just needed to be put down on paper. Other parts flowed. Some parts of it, of course, had to be redeveloped. So there's no immediate answer to the second part of your question at all, which makes any comprehensive sense.
No, that makes excellent sense. That sounds like a normal creative process, but I'm somewhat comforted to know that over 50 years, it's still something that you want to keep revisiting. That feels like a core of a good adaptation, right? It's a story that you want to keep telling.
Well, try to give you one example. The passage of the Dead Marshes, when Frodo sees the dead faces in the water. I'd originally written that back in 1969, a very, I would say, drab bit of recitative. It had a sort of certain degree of dramatic force, but not much going for it. when it came to actually doing the rewriting 3 or 4 years ago, it occurred to me that, of course, it's not the first time that you actually come across the encounter of things that are the dead, which are sort of half coming back to life. You've already had it with the Barrow Wight.
Mm-hmm.
And the Barrow Wight music I had written back in the 1970s, and it was a very distinctive bit of writing. It's basically what sounds like a folk song, but decidedly wrong. It keeps twisting around and finishing up on the wrong notes, or in a key slightly different to the one you expect. And this then became the actual musical theme underpinning Frodo's vision of the dead faces in the water. It then comes back again when Aragorn talks of the vision of Malbeth the Seer, and of course when he's actually going through the paths of the dead. So that same musical theme is developed and enhanced as the thing goes along. That, of course, was deliberately done and worked out. I think it works out all right.
Yeah, it does. It's a great section. He's asking me because I've heard more of it than he has now.
That is quite literally true. So the last version of the score I've actually heard is the one that existed about 4 or 5 months ago, I think.
Yes, and we have been
with a lot more singing in place now.
Yes. That's great. Well, so Paul, I'm thinking about, so you turned to the, so you were starting to do this stuff. You began thinking about setting The Hobbit back as a child, right? And then we're continued to working through Lord of the Rings things. Then obviously the Silmarillion is released in 1977, right? So after the Silmarillion comes out, so as you said, you had thought through The Hobbit and part of, at least, of the Lord of the Rings. What was it that made you kind of turn to the Silmarillion after, because again, clearly the very release of the Silmarillion postdates a lot of this work you were already doing, right? And yet the Silmarillion, adaptations that you had done were the most completed ones, right? You were only, what you're saying, you were only returning to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings much later. So it seems that the Silmarillion kind of captured you in some way, right? And you were drawn to the to this. I would love to hear more about your relationship with the Silmarillion and what drew you to this form of adaptation with it.
I think the answer is that the Children of Húrin,
Mm-hmm.
which is, let's face it, one of the great Tolkien stories, and of course is also short enough to be contained in the span of one evening.
Yes.
Of course, with the Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion took a lot more in the nature of adaptation, largely because Tolkien himself had left it in that particular form. But there was persistently a choice between you could take a version from this version or that version or another version of the text. With the Lord of the Rings, that doesn't exist. Basically, you have a finished version of the text, and anybody who tries to move away from that is a fool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Trying to read the word things for the sake of it is a non-starter. The words are exactly as Tolkien designed them and should be left alone. With the Silmarillion, that's not the case. That Tolkien did leave several different versions, and occasionally there you can actually alter things and justify doing so. At least I think you can. And of course, you have to actually try and make this plot of the Silmarillion congruent with itself.
Yes. Yes. Which another project Tolkien didn't quite finish. Yes, exactly. So is that I am not only had known very little about this project before today, but I'm also not very experienced in opera in general. So the cycle that you had in mind, right? Whether it's the full 13 evening cycle that you had originally envisioned, or the later slightly more trim version, you were thinking of this as basically telling different story segments from the Silmarillion over the course of would it be like one evening would be like the Beren and Luthien evening, and then what the next evening would be like the children of Hurin, or whatever sequence you did it in?
Yes. That was the idea of the Silmarillion. It was originally 4 evenings, one of which was Fëanor introducing and setting up the plot.
Right. for the Silmarils.
Second
Yeah.
one, second one better than Luthien. Third one, Children of Hurlin. The fourth one, the Fall of Gondolin, which is basically Maeglin for the first part, and then Tuor for the second part.
Mm-hmm.
The only Gondolin, of course, you're running into problems with lack of material.
Yes.
And there's a lot of Tolkien's poetry introduced into the last act of The Fall of Gondolin. And as I say, with the War of Wrath, we had even more fun and games, trying to actually assemble effectively a collection of vignettes for the first part of it, and then Leia Earendel and so on for afterwards. I mean, that's the way that the Silmarillion was always designed to be in 4 evenings and eventually 5. The Lord of the Rings slimmed down when Simon did the cutting back of my 13 evening
And grew back.
and then, yes, I was going to say the trouble was that I kept thinking, oh, I want to keep that bit, and back up again by the time I got at it. There are some really quite abrupt abridgments in the Lord of the Rings. For example, the whole of the Crick Hollow removal subplot seems to disappear. Well, it does disappear entirely.
They still go to Crick Hollow.
They do go to Crick Hollow, and they go into the Old Forest, and they meet Bombadil, and the Barrow-wight is still there. There are no massive cuts of any material.
There's no story changes. If the story as it does in the books, there are sections that obviously, that it has to work on stage.
Yes.
And not like a film where you can just cut from one thing to another. It's not. It has to.
Yeah.
So things have to be truncated down, and which means you do cut things, but they're condensed. But I mean, what we've ended up with now actually is he has ended up with a 13 evening cycle, but 5 of them are Silmarillion, 2 are The Hobbit, and 6 are Lord of the Rings, and then you've got an appendix of bits and bobs. So, but that's that it was never intended to be like that, but it is all musically connected.
Yeah.
Right.
There's stuff in Feanor that you hear in Lord of the Rings. There's stuff in Beren and Luthien. You hear it all, and it all interconnects. It uses what Wagner termed leitmotifs.
Yep.
So themes.
Yes.
How film score does it,
Yes.
as does the Rings of Power scores and things. They have leitmotifs, but with Paul's version, sometimes they appear. They change. So Beren has a theme, Luthien has a theme. When the 2 of them end up together, that theme becomes joined as one, and it becomes a full theme. So there's things like, you can listen through the pieces once and go, that's nice, I like that. But you can go back and you can, sorry, my Alexa lit up then, and I've no idea why. You can go back and listen again and look at the guides that we've written on this website and things, and you can keep going in. And I've heard this probably more than Paul has.
Mm-hmm.
There's someone here recording the other day, and I literally sat there going, I've not heard that before. It's far too clever. Just little things.
Yeah.
And, it's all musically connected, but it is a musical journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, each of the individual operas of the Silmarillion do not sound the same. They are different types. So, Feanor, there's no mortals. It's all gods and elves.
Yes.
Valar, and it's all this big, grandiose things that involve me having to sing stupid high notes. But it's
Curse of the tenor.
You have that, but then you have Beren and Luthien, which is a love story with monsters.
Right.
And it has a different theme. You have Children of Húrin, which is the comedy interlude. It's just, Children of Húrin's hard going.
It is. Yeah, as one of our viewers was saying, the Silmarillion in parts will kind of make Wagner's Ring cycle seem light and playful, in comparison.
Definitely. Children of Húrin, I love it. It's dark, it's gritty, it's that, but it's, different things for different people. Then you get Fall of Gondolin, which is a more heroic tale, but it has more referred to as standalone numbers. It's like, here's a duet, here's an aria, here's the, which Children of Húrin have, because it's a narrative. It's not, people don't wax poetical in Children of Húrin. They're too busy going, oh, woe is me. So it's it's that. And then War of Wrath becomes a hybrid of them all that finishes the story. And we had this discussion about War of Wrath. War of Wrath, Paul was worried that it couldn't stand on its own. And my response was, you don't watch Return of the King without watching the other parts. But at least the story is finished. So, well, where there might be things, it can stand on its own. There are things, but there's a lot more going on in the background. So if you want to just listen to it and enjoy the music, you can. But if you listen through the entire cycle, you hear that all the way through, and and then bits of that tie-in. So obviously, Paul mentioned Hobbit is, well, it's a younger work of Paul's, but actually that works really well because it's a work for younger people. And so Paul's slightly more quirky style of that era, it works really well for that piece.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it's Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Rings it's a hell of a musical journey. It does not, the music starts as one thing and it ends as something else, because you cannot have 17 hours of music that I've got to record. You cannot have all of that sound the same. So,
I think you're in the wrong room for that argument. We're here. We're
right,
here for
exactly.
The Hobbit music is quirky. Like the music from The Hobbit. Quirky, it's bouncy, it's fun. The Rohan music, it's heroic, it's big, it's grand. You've got the austere music of Minas Tirith. You have, there's so much like that, and of course it then, by the time it ends, it links into the Silmarillion. So when you hear Frodo leaving on the ship, you're hearing similar music to you heard in The Fall of Gondolin when Tuor was leaving on the ship.
Yeah.
You hear Elbereth singing in the distance from Fëanor. So it's all interconnected. You don't have to listen all the way through everything, but trust me, you will find incredible things all the way through.
We talk a lot about tools on this show of tools in our toolkit for understanding adaptation, and it's so nice to have a new element to the kit, to consider opera, and to just hear such the longevity of the project too, that you're not just talking about a 24-month adaptation of a book to a film and it's released and that's it. You're talking decades, and the ability for the work to kind of match the growth of the artist, I think that's fascinating. Like, being able to kind of walk that path, but also talking about the tools that you're using makes total sense, that you do have these different themes that play in different ways. And, we talked about that with Bear McCreary, using the inversion of different tunes for Rings of Power, and inverting that is the dark versus the light, and, all these different tempo tricks that you don't get if you just watch or just listen, but having somebody walk you through it or listening to it again, diving a little bit deeper into the depth of your skill, your craft, that's where you start to really understand like how different artists hone their tools to create these adaptations. So the fact that you've been honing your tools for decades is incredible. What fun.
I'll give you one other example of that sort of thing, whereby a theme will actually transform itself over an extended period. There's a theme that I originally wrote for the Anu Lindale Symphony, which was the theme for Men as the second children of Iluvatar. And that comes back, first of all, as a hint in Fëanor, and then more fully developed in the Children of Húrin, where it actually is the final theme you hear in the work of the Children of Húrin. But then in Gondolin, it comes back as a principal theme in the duet between Tuor and Idril, and there it actually finds its sort of what you think is its summation. You don't hear it again in the rest of the Lord of the Rings, or you do very briefly in War of Wrath, but it's only at the point where Eärendil and Elwing are discussing with their fate. But apart from that, you don't hear it again in War of Wrath. But then you haven't heard it all the way through the Lord of the Rings until the moment when Aragorn starts quoting his Quenya speech at Eärendil, and quite suddenly at that moment you get that same theme coming back, first of all in the orchestra, then in the choir as they're singing Aragorn's words in English translation. And then as Aragorn goes on to the scene on the Mount Mindolrin looking down before they just find the tree, and Aragorn is talking about his mortality, then quite suddenly this is back in full force. So you're suddenly being thrust right back into the idea about mortality in a way that has not been discussed at all until that point in the Lord of the Rings. It that I hope will immediately, for anybody who knows the Silmarillion, will immediately have an impact
Yes.
over and above simply the fact you've got a new thing coming in the orchestra. If people don't notice that, it's fine. But I think if you do notice that, it actually could literally grip you by the throat at that moment. Probably wouldn't happen.
Gripping singers by the throat. There's a bit.
That's dangerous.
Oh, that is wonderful. You know, one thing I wanted to just kind of come back to for a second is the relationship with Christopher Tolkien and the Tolkien estate. So let me start off by saying, a lot of people have the idea. I mean, I talked to a lot of Tolkien fans over the years, and a lot of people have the idea that, you know, the Tolkien estate is, you know, some kind of cruel organization looking for excuses to beat on little people and prevent creativity. And in particular, there's this idea out there that Christopher Tolkien was hyper protective of the Silmarillion and wanted to make sure that nobody ever touched that. And it's such a striking part of your story, Paul, that when you approached Christopher, you reached out and asked Christopher about the idea of adapting the Silmarillion into an opera, and he not only didn't, sort of attack you like so many Tolkien fans, of course, sort of assume would happen, but instead was giving you, immediately responded by giving you unpublished stuff, like the things from the history of, giving you the unpublished Book of Lost Tales, giving you access to the Children of Hurin material, the kind of generosity of the response from him that you're describing is I think that's a kind of story that I wish more people knew about Christopher Tolkien and the way the estate has so often worked with artists over the years.
I would say there's one particular thing from Christopher Tolkien I'm very proud of, which is that I'd actually said that I was concerned that it was going, when I was at the work I was doing, was going to be seen as simply cashing in on the Tolkien estate. And he actually wrote back to me and said, although he recognised the fact that this was a real problem in a lot of cases and very difficult to counter, and he actually said that, he said he could not believe that a level of sheer crassness, which was his word, would accuse me of cashing in.
Right.
Because he said, there's clearly... You don't do this sort of thing just as a means of cashing in. It's a rather way of going about the procedure.
Yeah, and since the Lord of the Rings was announced, there's been quite a few people commenting blindly on quite a few things, and
yes,
the number of people saying we're trying to cash in. Take it from an opera singer that is working in opera. If you're gonna cash in on something, you don't write an opera of it.
Yes. So what you're saying is you're doing the crass cashing in completely wrong. Is basically yeah.
And I must say that we recorded all of the Silmarillion. The singers still did it for nothing.
Yeah.
Did it as a favour to me, and they're on a profit share. That is the thing, and that's the way we've worked. And we're continuing to work in Lord of the Rings. We're doing things a little differently, but it's still. I can't afford these singers. They're my friends, but I can't afford them. I could pay them what they're worth. Mm-hmm. And we can't, but they're wanting to take part because it's a wonderful project. And to be honest, I keep talking until they just say yes. But there's so many people online saying you're trying to cash in. Trust me, a musical. If you do a musical, you can run it for 8 performances a week and run it until it makes a profit. Opera is subsidized. Opera, right. You cannot sing it 8 times a week. You wouldn't want to say we were doing Beren and Luthien, you wouldn't want to do it more than twice in a week. Mm-hmm. It's tiring. It's physically tiring to sing like that. So it's not, this is not something that is a cash cow. It definitely is. This is a labor of love.
Passion project, yeah.
And it's amazing that we can get it out there. And even things like with the recordings. So I call them demo recordings. This is another thing that people have been saying online. So why is it called a demo recording? It's a demo recording because we have done it on a budget of 0. And as much as I would love to have a full orchestra, full chorus, and full cast of principals recording it, it would never make anywhere near its money back. It would probably only make a tenth of its money back in the current climate. So I use orchestral samples to create the orchestral sound. It's not a real orchestra. I know that. I freely admit it. That's why I label it on all the things. But it's as close as you're going to get until we find some millionaire or billionaire with a couple of million to spare that wants to fund it. And trust me, if you know them, send them my way. But it's, but it's the same with Lord of the Rings. It's, there was some misinformation about Lord of the Rings flitting around saying, when's it being performed? It's like, well, no, we're recording it first. We're doing baby steps because, no one's going to fund a 6-evening opera without hearing it, without knowing it. Oh, and fair enough. And there may be other steps in the middle. There may be concerts of bits and bobs and things. It's making people familiar with the music. But I did have to say I got quite I got disheartened when Lord of the Rings was announced. That some of the comments people were coming out with, and it's social media. You read it, you get
familiar.
And I waded in occasionally just to stop some things dead.
Yes.
I'm pretty good at putting things dead if I can try it, but it's often just misinformation or someone misunderstood. But there's just so many. It's like you're trying to compete with Wagner. We love Wagner.
Right.
Not competing. You can't compete with Wagner.
Well, I mean, it's like, what? Because you're writing another opera? Is anyone who ever writes a novel competing with Tolkien? Therefore, and they shouldn't do it. Like, it's a very strange thing to say.
There are other opera cycles out there.
Yeah.
Just people don't know them. It's Wagner's the only person that wrote a 5-evening thing. And other people saying, Howard Shore was incredible. You're not going to beat him. It's I love Howard Shore.
I'm trying to.
Right.
Yeah.
I absolutely love those films, but we're not. And Howard Shore wrote a film score.
Yes.
Film score is not an opera. An opera is something different. An opera is telling a story through music with singing. And it's not all, I'm going to sing this big aria, I'm going to sing this daft tune. It's not. Sometimes it's narrative. It's what we call recitative. It's people talking to each other and singing. It's a different thing, but it's an art form that's been around for centuries. And if you listen to it, you might find actually that there's more in it that you love that you didn't know you were going to. And I'm not saying you're going to love every minute of every work.
Right.
We've had reviews of the Silmarillion where people, every single review, someone picks a different opera that's their favorite.
Well, of course, that's what happens with every creative piece.
Yeah.
I love that in your own creative process, though, you, like Tolkien, just had too much information and couldn't fit it in, so you created your own appendices. Like, that's great.
All Tolkien works come with appendices. This is a matter of definition.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's wonderful. And so the appendices, these are things. So like you mentioned the Lay of Eärendil, right? That the Lay of Eärendil, the song, because it's a very long poem, right? So, and again, to sing it in opera form takes, as you said, like 25 minutes, right? So you don't want to just interrupt the middle of the Lord of the Rings story with the 25-minute thing, but you didn't want to lose that, so you put that. Were there did the appendices tend to be treatments of particular Tolkien songs or verses, or were they or are there some of them that are just other things that were other stories or elements that you just felt couldn't fit in the night? Yeah. How did they end up there?
Right. One of the other appendices is Aragorn's song Under Weathertop, the song about Beren and Luthien.
Yes.
Which is much of the material is that which you already heard in the Beren and Luthien opera. Mm-hmm. So took it out of the Lord of the Rings, where Aragorn actually takes over and sings the song of Gil-galad was an Elven King instead, which is a nice short little number which doesn't hold up the action for too long. But the Beren and Luthien version is there in the appendix.
It's 10 minutes long. It's another thing that you might love these poems, but they take a long time. There's the Doom of Mandos in Feanor. You can read it in a minute, but it takes 10 minutes to sing.
Right.
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 Yeah.
Sorry,
Totally
David.
worth it, though. Oh my goodness, the Doom of Mandos, totally worth 10 minutes.
One of the other appendices arose quite recently when on the Discord group. It was pointed out to me that I had left out the Durin song from which Gimli sings in Moria. Again, that had to be left out for the reason of dramatic pacing. It had a point where the tension should be building. So that's also fact. But I actually wrote that deliberately to put it into an appendix, so it's there. And the fourth of the appendices is something rather different. It's the end of the Aragorn and Arwen story.
Right.
Which I always felt unhappy about leaving out, but of course it doesn't fit into the Lord of the Rings as such. But it is now there as an appendix, basically the death of Aragorn and the final scene of Arwen. That is over a quarter of an hour, I think.
It's 20 minutes.
20 minutes, yeah. And that really sort of is, it also brings back the narrative chorus which you've had in the Silmarillion, but which has been largely absent in the Lord of the Rings. So it actually affects as a sort of appendix, not only to the Lord of the Rings, but also looking right back across the Tolkien cycle as a whole. And there is now a fifth appendix, which belongs with The Hobbit, which is The Quest of Erebor.
Ah, right.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Which is, of course, a comic, sort of Gandalf looking back comically, as it were,
Yes.
at the opening scene of The Hobbit. And that is just quite simply a little bit which you can take either immediately before the Homeward Bound thing with when Frodo leaves Minas Tirith, or you can listen to it at any point you actually want to, and want a quick sip of Alka-Seltzer after.
So is it now when you were doing the Quest of Erebor, did you deliberately sort of vary, like alter this, because were you trying to do it in a similar style to the way that the Hobbit songs were done, or were you changing the style in the way that like the Quest of Erebor is like a different perspective on the story?
Musical material is the same as the Hobbit, but it sounds different because it's been differently.
It's been narrated by Gandalf the White.
Yes. Yes.
With different lens.
Yes, yeah, I was going to say a different.
Yeah.
It's seen through a different lens.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's purely simply a light-hearted little thing to finish off with.
Oh, that's delightful.
Music yet, have we?
No, we haven't listened to any music.
We haven't.
No,
we
I
haven't
was
listened to
gonna
any
say,
music. Yes, we should. So, tell me which. I know you sent me links to several pieces, and I'm just looking at the YouTube channel, so I'm hoping we don't get bombarded with unfortunate YouTube ads. But we'll take our chances. Is there one that you would particularly like us to play that we could talk about a little bit?
The first trailer for the Silmarillion, I think it's about four minutes long.
Yep.
That one was done whilst we were working on War of Wrath, so it will say coming soon War of Wrath with completely different artwork and things missing. But actually that's a good starter to hear all the different bits. 4 minutes of hearing lots of different bits of all the different operas in the Silmarillion.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can play that. So I will. Hang on a second. Let me make 100% sure. I'm gonna get this. I gotta get make sure my audio routing is correct here. Okay, actually, I'm glad I checked because I don't think people would have heard that. And now they will. So, okay, very good. If I have this set up properly, let's have a go and see if we can listen to so this is, yes, the overall Silmarillion trailer here. Oh, that is wonderful. Man,
I loved hearing you guys kind of hum along now and again too. Like that was great. That was incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh man, this is just like one of the most wonderful things that I did not know existed. And it is just so marvelous to learn about this. Let's talk a little bit more about, I want to sort of learn more about the adaptation process. You guys have talked about, so like Simon, you were talking about the way that things have to be cut for the sake, again, in order to make it work as an opera, thinking about how it would work on stage and everything. What are some of the, maybe we use a Lord of the Rings example, as that might be easiest for everybody to kind of imagine and understand. Can you give me an example of where, you're thinking in turn, you're sort of faced with these decisions, right? We talked a little bit about one Silmarillion example with the Fall of Doriath, right? Which is a complicated example because, of course, there's so many decisions Tolkien didn't make, when it came to that. I mean, that story is famously, like, from a textual standpoint, the biggest mess in the entire Silmarillion. But, so there's a lot there, and there's a lot of issues there. But so again, let's think about a Lord of the Rings place, like a moment in the Lord of the Rings where some of the kind of cuts or compressions that you had to make in order to make a scene work. Can you think of an example scene that might be fun to talk about?
I'll start talking about it, then Paul can fill you in more. So, the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Yes.
So, battles on stage. Stunt actors cost money. Giving opera singers swords. Trust me, I've been given one on stage before. We can't sing like we do and keep doing crazy.
Right.
So, the majority of the battle is off stage,
right,
depicted by. But what Paul has done, he's phased it in, so you have moments where it focuses back in on the main characters. So usually it's Theoden or someone so you have a bit of music that goes on depicting a bit of battle, then it flashes to Theoden talking to, which one is it?
Well,
it's Aragorn and some of the others, yeah. And so they so he's talking to him, and then it flashes away again.
Right.
So basically it would be one of these things where lights down, noise, lights up, lights down, and everything's in different. It's just a stage way of depicting it, because it doesn't matter what you do on stage, people would be disappointed seeing one of those battles on.
Yes.
Because for a standard opera, you've got a chorus of 40, and usually only 20 of them would be the people playing some of those characters. And they still need to sing, and they still need to do things. So, you usually end up with a handful of people just playing around with a sword and then cutting away again. So rather than have it look naff, you style it out. That's what it is. So the events still happen, but they just you don't see them directly. So do you want
to? Yeah. Yes. I mean, we did exactly the same thing. Well, I did exactly the same thing with the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
Yeah.
Where I had one major advantage, which that Tolkien has actually provided the Rohirrim song describing the Battle of Pelennor Fields,
yes,
which I was able to actually have the offstage chorus singing those to actually cover the battle sequences. So you actually move from one set of characters to another one in the course of the battle, with the chorus acting as the filler between. That was exactly the same technique, by the way, that Brian Sibley used in the BBC adaptation of Theme, trying to actually get around it. Brian Sibley actually had some additional material out composed for it. I didn't need to do that because I actually managed to condense it into a smaller compass. But again, the same idea was there, that you don't show the battles or the big action sequences on stage, they're kept off stage. In the same way in the Silmarillion, the dragon Glaurung, he's there, but he's at the back of the stage. You don't have big model dragons trundling around at the front of the stage and making everybody laugh.
Yes.
Well, even if they are not laugh-inducing, they are expensive.
Yes.
And take up most of the rehearsal process.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised the amount of time, as when you're working on an opera, if there is something like that, it becomes the entire focus of the rehearsal process, is making that work. So actually, obviously, if someone does these down the road, the director and designer will make decisions and do things that way. But what Paul has done with his first ones and what I did with War of Wrath is to give stage directions. So you say exactly, because there are things in the music that have to happen at certain points. So, Beren cutting the Silmaril from the crown, getting his hand bitten off by an angry dog, all that kind of
Right.
stuff. It happen on certain beats of the music. So that is prescripted. And Paul has put what his wishes are, and I did with War of Wrath as well, and Lord of the Rings as well. There's things there, and it's ideas for them to build from, but it's to make it so that the focus is on the right thing, which is the characters.
Right.
It's not about it's a different focus than a film. A film,
Yeah.
A film with a massive budget can have these massive battles and can flit around all over the place and change, but you can't on stage.
Yes. And the thing that's really fascinating to me about that is is the balance, right? I mean, you were talking about Howard Shore, right? Or Bear McCreary. When you're doing a film, when you're doing soundtracks, right? When you're doing a score, you've got the visuals doing a certain amount of the work and the music doing a certain amount of the work, right? And of course, in almost all films, viewers vastly underestimate the amount of work that the music does in the first place, right? I mean, it does way more work than most people realize, even, or think about. However, the visuals are in fact doing a lot of work as well, right? I mean, that's, and in many places, I would, most places really, I would, there are occasionally scenes, right, where you will get like relatively simple, visual shots and swelling music that really rises to the front of your attention and stuff, right? But most of the time, although the work that the music is doing is very, very important, the experience, the narrative is really being carried by the visuals, right? And so thinking about how in an opera situation, right? This is not like it's not just like an orchestral concert by itself, right? There are visuals, right? Like there are actors, they're standing there, so that there is a visual element, but it's like the balance between how much of the story is being carried by the visuals and how much of the story is being carried by the music is vastly different, right, in the operatic situation than it is in film. And so, yeah, it's a really fascinating thing to think of, the way in which you were describing when we want dramatic action, when we want people really to be moved by that experience of being in the midst of the battle. Sometimes, Maggie, in films, they'll cut the music entirely, right? When you're just being surrounded by these images of being in battle and stuff. There are moments, right, where whereas you guys are doing 100% the opposite of that, right? We're not gonna rely on the visuals at all. We're just the music is gonna entirely be the thing that's gonna bring people into that experience.
Yeah, obviously, if it's done on stage, there is some visual,
yes,
but we're not worried about that with these recordings. But Paul has written that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, when you're on these works are designed to be performed live. So whilst it might be a good idea to have dragons flying and this, that, and the other, you do them live, something's going to go wrong.
Right.
But it's designed to be live and keep the narrative going, and to be sung live and to be done like that. And no two people will sing it the same and do the same with it. I mean, I don't sing it the same twice.
Right.
So different takes. It's it's very different, and it's the thing that a film score has in its favour is it's fixed.
Yes.
Timings are fixed, this, that, and the other. Whereas on stage, often you have a conductor there waiting for something to happen before it can continue on. Right. Whether it's your singer standing in the right place or whether your singer can't see the conductor, because trust me, we need to. So it's just a different art form. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
And you can't look at them the same way. It's designed to be sat in an auditorium, seeing people in a distance or up close, depending on if you've got one of the expensive seats at the front. Moving around and doing things. But the music that Paul's written, it will fill the house. It is incredible. It's just it's there, and the music can do everything in and of itself. But when if at some point there is a live version of it, it will add something else to it. But again, here on our recordings won't necessarily be exactly the speeds. Things, singers will want stuff at different speeds. Every conductor wants things at different speeds. but this is the version that we've put together. Fair enough, we've used electronic means to make the orchestra happen, but they're what Paul wants for this recording.
Right.
We've gone through it, speeds and everything. So if nothing else, there's a reference point for the conductor wants this. Whether we like it or not, this is what the composer wants. So now you wrote something here for me to. What's
basically the inherent piece?
Oh yes, we can have yes we can. But have you got any more questions? Because I can see we're getting short on time now.
We are getting short on time. Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of reiterate the balance point, because I feel like that's a thing that we don't say enough, that there's so many different tools that, like we said, with film and stuff, but with this, you get the benefit of costumes and stage design and sets if you go to see it live, but you don't rely on it. Whereas often with visual mediums, you rely on it. So having the freedom of your creativity be something that is like that, the music, the voice, and that can be changed, that's really cool. Like, you do have it pretty set, like it is a music, it is a score, it has set times and notes, but there's interpretation of the artist that lets it adjust.
Yes.
So having a fixed adaptation that can actually be different every time, it's like reading an audiobook, like we have these different versions of Tolkien's audiobook, and they are vastly different from each other just based on performance. Change the actor in 2 different films, vastly different performance.
Right.
So being able to have that kind of that balance, being solely fixed on the audio side of it, the music and the performance, I think that's really cool. That's a neat way to look at an adaptation.
And it brings in the dramatic element, like the difference between film and stage drama, right? I mean, a play is not the same any 2 performances in a row, because even when the cast is all the same, the audience is different, right? It's just every performance is its own thing. And so, yes, thinking about opera in those similar terms, but it's the music itself, which is different, right? That experience of, cast, orchestra, and audience in the experience of the music as that thing which is really carrying, which is really the center of the entire adaptation. It really is a unique situation. Yeah.
You can feel on stage the audience if they're enjoying and if it's going. You always feel it on stage. We can't always see you, but we can often see more than some people think. So always behave in the theatre. But you can feel it. If an audience is coming with you on a performance, you can feel it on stage.
Yes.
Even if it's just small reactions or little things like that, it is. There are things there that you can feel, and it's a wonderful live form to go and witness and experience, because it can move you like no other.
Yeah.
But you have to go with it. You go in without preconceptions, and you might find you enjoy it. But I'm not saying you enjoy every opera. So people say, when people say to me, I don't like opera, it's like, well, which ones have you listened to?
Right.
I can recommend probably 15 to 20 others that you might like if you tell me what you liked and what you disliked.
Right.
Opera. There's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of operas.
This could be somebody's gateway.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah. So, Paul has suggested another video for us to round things up, if that's okay.
Sure.
There's a video called "I Sang of Leaves."
Yes. Okay.
So,
here, let's see. Let me.
Yeah. So, for those of you that haven't found our YouTube feed, please. There's more trailers, there's more everything on there. There's a big trailer for Lord of the Rings, but actually this is a nice way to finish, because this is an adaptation of Galadriel's song, I Sang of Leaves, which our Galadriel sang. This was a video we did in lockdown. So Angharad recorded this at her home.
Okay.
On the microphone. I mixed it, and Julian did the video and things. But actually, it's a nice way to finish off, because you get to hear a full song rather than snippets of things.
Yes. Excellent. Okay. I have that right here. Let's listen to that. Wonderful. I love the segue into narrative at the end, so we can get kind of a taste of that. Yeah.
Very deliberate choice, but it's a gorgeous song, and Angharad is an incredible singer. She's our Luthien and our Nienor on and Galadriel on in the War of Roth. So she's a lot of the Silmarillion. But yes, some of the casting from the Silmarillion passes on into Lord of the Rings as well.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe she recorded that at home too. The quality is amazing. Beautiful.
We got very handy during COVID.
Yeah,
Right.
that's absolutely beautiful.
And it won't sound exactly like that on the actual full recording because she's been and re-recorded it into the same microphone as everyone else now. So it's
Right.
yeah,
Right.
when it comes to it.
Well, that's wonderful.
Fair.
So let's just talk, before we end, of course. Let's talk about where people can access this stuff. The recordings, the demo recordings that you were talking about, are available in the shop on Paul's website. Is it?
Yeah, Paul's website links to Volante's website because it was easier to just run one store rather than two. So yeah, all of the CDs are on there. The website automatically sorts out shipping and everything. It only charges exactly what it costs to ship. I'm sorry, you know, it is what it is. But it's so there is that. You can find it on. Oh, he's gone. My beautiful assistant here. There you go.
Okay.
But it is available on Amazon and things, but they only took very limited stock because they probably didn't think it would sell very many. So stock here. It is on Amazon and Apple for digital purchase. There are a couple of streaming platforms it's on, but it's definitely not on Spotify because I want the singers to get paid, and to be honest, it's a niche thing, and if it's getting paid infinitesimal amounts, we're never going to get money back to cover the costs and get ready to pay for Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So, but yeah, so it's on. Yeah, if you look, they are on the digital platforms. But the last I checked, I think the CDs are cheaper, even with postage.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah. So there's lots of stuff here. I see the individual. They see that there's the full, the complete. 10 CD set is and that's the full Silmarillion. That's like all five.
All five operas, two discs per opera.
All five operas of the Silmarillion.
Individuals are quite rare now because I had to consolidate everything into complete boxes. So there's only a handful of some, and some of them are now out. Like I think Children of Húrin is out of stock by itself because it's we have to make sure these box sets keep going for as long as possible. You can also find vocal scores and full scores for all the completed recordings. So if you follow along the dots, you get these get these wonderful books here. So we have full scores.
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Artwork on the front, and there are vocal scores. So if people don't know what the difference is, a full score is what a conductor uses and what Paul composes in, where you see absolutely every instrument on the page.
Yeah.
A vocal score is what a singer and stage management and directors use, where the orchestral part is reduced down to a piano part. So if you're not comfortable reading 500 staves at once, which is like me, I'm a singer for so long, it messes with my head trying to read all of that. But the vocal scores are much smaller books and much easier to follow. But we've made sure every time we've released a recording, we make sure the score comes out with it so that it can, so that people can buy it. And if they want to perform bits of it, just let us know. It's that. But it's and there's also another CD of Paul's called Akalabeth, which you can get on.
I was just going to ask about that. Yeah, that's not included in the Silmarillion one. That's separate from the Silmarillion.
It's a separate release. It was released before we started work on the Silmarillion. Akalabeth is a piano piece, and also on the album there's Dairon, which is a piano and flute piece, which has ended up as part of Beren and Luthien. The Akalabeth itself in orchestral version is part of War of Roth, but not the full piece. And also on here you've got the Tolkien songs, which are now part of Lord of the Rings. So if you want to hear bits of Lord of the Rings, but just sung with singer and piano, there are bits on here. There's also another song cycle of Paul's called Mysteries of Time, which is a gorgeous song cycle. There's some gorgeous music in there. And there's also his setting of Tolkien's Shadow Bride on there.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, okay.
We do have another album that's fallen through the cracks in all the announcements, but I'd be remiss not to advertise it here. There are some other piano works of Paul's that we're getting recorded later this year by an incredible pianist called Duncan Honeybourne. He's going to have his own version of a Calabeth on there. He's also going to do the Wedding March from the Fall of Gondolin, and also a new piece by Paul, which has links to Lord of the Rings. It's the Passing of Arwen. So you've got those,
Wow.
along with some other piano pieces of Paul's that are incredible on there as well. That's being recorded in December. It should be out early next year.
Wow. Prolific doesn't begin.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
We've only Tolkien projects. Trust me, there's a lot more projects.
Well, and even that's just scratching the surface of just the Tolkien one. So yeah,
Yes.
wow.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. That was amazing.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. It's so fascinating to think about. You know, we love thinking about adaptation and the process of adaptation and the relationship, you know, this whole complicated act of translating a work from one medium to another medium, and the marvelous kind of creative response that people have, you know, to, you know, again, Paul, I go back to this, what obviously struck you in reading the Silmarillion, and then going from, you know, just as when you were a kid reading The Hobbit and your reaction was like, I must make music of this, right? I must bring the neighborhood kids together to, you know, to sing The Hobbit. Right. And thinking about, you know, again, the way that has grown over time and developed, it's just wonderful to see. So thank you so much for sharing this. I am certainly hoping that lots of people will get a chance to buy and listen to this. I'm looking forward to sharing this. My wife is not the biggest Tolkien fan in the world, but she is a big classical music and opera fan. So I am looking forward to getting the CD set and listening to it with her.
You found your middle ground.
Exactly. It'll be great. It'll be great.
I can't wait to fall down this rabbit hole. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, this is
my
excellent.
work music for the next month.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you
guys
guys so much.
Along with Feanor, you might get a bit angry.
Hey, that's okay.
To Feanor whilst driving.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for visiting us today. This has been a marvelous discussion. We really appreciate it. And, you know, good luck with everything moving forward as The Lord of the Rings is coming out into release. And, you know, if certainly let us know, especially should you find your millionaire and there's any chance of performance happening, by all means, let us know.
Posted.
And yeah, that's something we would love to be able to promote, not to mention, would love to be able to attend if that were to be happening. So I'd be over to Wales or to London in a heartbeat if that were able to happen over there. So anyway, marvelous. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us today for another discussion. And we will be back next week, maybe with that delayed discussion of
we have to talk about next week. I'm in the air and I forgot. So we'll get back to you.
Well, either next
we'll
week
get back to you about a time.
well,
I've got like a 5-hour layover in an airport. We might do it then. So time might change.
Broadcast. Yeah,
I know. Bring it on. We have a lot to talk about. I feel like we should make it happen. But
we do.
Simon,
Excellent.
Paul, thank you guys so much for
Thank
this.
you.
It was just so insightful to see into your minds and to bring your lens into our discussion of adaptation. So really grateful for your expertise and your passion. So thank you for joining.
Appreciate it so much. Thank you, everybody. Bye now.